The courtroom was quiet except for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the slender figure standing in the witness box. Her name was Laura Bennett, and she looked like any other, ordinary person, brown hair neatly combed, wearing a simple navy blue dress that fit her frame well. But there was something about her presence that made people pay attention. Maybe it was the way she held herself, straight-backed and composed, despite the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. Or maybe it was the fact that this trial had already drawn so much attention, and now all eyes were on her. Laura took a deep breath before beginning to speak. Her voice came out soft at first, almost hesitant. "I remember walking into the office that morning," she said, her words slow and deliberate. "It felt normal, just like any other day." She paused, collecting her thoughts, and then continued. "But by lunchtime, everything changed." Her accent caught some people off guard. It wasn't exactly Southern, though there were traces of it, a hint of a drawl here and there. But mixed in were odd inflections, slight pauses where they didn't belong, and sounds that seemed unfamiliar, almost alien. Some jurors exchanged confused glances. Others leaned forward, trying to catch every word. Even the reporters in the back row stopped typing for a moment, their pens hovering above their notebooks. Judge Richard Grayson sat at his bench, his sharp gaze fixed on Laura. He was known for being strict, even unyielding, when it came to courtroom decorum. His reputation preceded him. He believed clarity and precision were essential in legal proceedings, and right now, he wasn't getting what he wanted. Frowning, he raised a hand, signaling Laura to stop. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "I'm afraid your accent is making comprehension difficult. Please try to speak more clearly." Laura blinked, taken aback. She hadn't expected this interruption. For a moment she said nothing, her lips parting slightly as if searching for the right response. Then she nodded slowly and tried again. This time she spoke louder, enunciating each syllable carefully. "I walked into the office, and I saw them doing things they shouldn't have been doing. But it didn't help. If anything, her effort to clarify only made her speech sound stranger. The unnatural rhythm of her words grew more pronounced, and her accent seemed to shift subtly, as though it couldn't settle into one consistent pattern. Judge Grayson sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett," he said finally, "but I must ask you to step down until we can ensure clarity and communication." The room fell silent. No one moved. Laura stood frozen, her hands gripping the railing of the witness box tightly. Her knuckles turned white, though her expression remained calm. She glanced toward her lawyer, Daniel Harper, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Still, the tension in the air was palpable. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what would happen next. Then, without warning, Laura spoke again. Her voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear over the hum of murmurs spreading through the gallery. Yet somehow it carried enough weight to silence everyone instantly. "You misunderstand," she said, her tone steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "This isn't my accent." For a long moment, no one reacted. The words hung there, suspended in the stillness of the courtroom. Then slowly, realization dawned on the faces around her. Confusion rippled through the crowd like waves crashing against a shore. Reporters perked up, their pens poised anxiously. Jurors exchanged bewildered looks. Even Judge Grayson looked startled, his usual stoic demeanor faltering ever so slightly. "What do you mean, Ms. Bennett?" he asked after a brief pause, his voice betraying a hint of curiosity beneath its authoritative tone. Laura hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor momentarily. When she looked up again, her eyes held a mix of fear and determination. "I mean," she began, choosing her words carefully, "that this voice, this way of speaking, it doesn't belong to me, not really." The statement sent shockwaves through the room. Whispers erupted, growing louder with each passing second. Some people laughed nervously, dismissing Laura's claim as nonsense. Others stared at her intently, wondering if there was truth hidden behind her cryptic words. Judge Grayson raised a hand, calling for order. Reluctantly, the murmurs died down, though the tension remained thick enough to cut with a knife. "Explain yourself, Ms. Bennett," the judge demanded, leaning forward slightly in his chair. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of intrigue in his eyes. Laura swallowed hard, visibly steeling herself for what she was about to say. 3 months ago, she began, her voice trembling slightly, I woke up in a hospital bed. I don't know how I got there. I don't remember anything about my life before that day. Everything, the memories, the experiences, even the way I talk, it's all different now. Like someone rewrote me. The confession hit like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed through the courtroom, followed by urgent whispers. Lawyers scribbled furiously in their notepads while reporters scrambled to capture every detail. Even Sarah Mitchell, the prosecution attorney, looked stunned, though she quickly recovered, raising an objection. "Your Honor," she interjected, her voice sharp and clipped. "This line of questioning has no relevance to the charges against Mr. Carter." Judge Grayson held up a hand, silencing her. "Overruled," he said firmly. "Proceed, Ms. Bennett." Encouraged by the judge's decision, Laura pressed on. "At first I thought I was imagining things. Doctors told me it was trauma-induced, amnesia, that I'd get better with time. But then..." She trailed off, her brow furrowing as though wrestling with a painful memory. "Then I started hearing voices. Not out loud, but in my head. They told me not to trust anyone. They warned me that I wasn't safe." Her words sent another ripple of unease through the room. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Was she delusional? Had the stress of the trial pushed her over the edge? Or was there something darker at play? Daniel Harper stood abruptly, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Without waiting for permission, he stepped closer to the bench, whispering urgently. Whatever he said caused Judge Grayson's frown to deepen. Finally, the judge nodded, turning his attention back to Laura. "Ms. Bennett," he said, his tone measured but tinged with skepticism, "are you suggesting that someone deliberately altered your speech and possibly your identity for reasons unknown?" Laura met his gaze squarely, her resolve strengthening with each passing second. "Yes," she replied simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying." The courtroom erupted once more, the noise reaching a fever pitch. Reporters shouted questions, lawyers argued amongst themselves, and spectators buzzed with excitement. Amid the chaos, one man near the back of the room slipped quietly toward the exit. No one noticed him leave, not until it was too late. The courtroom was alive with noise, a cacophony of voices overlapping as everyone tried to make sense of what Laura had just said. Reporters jotted down frantic notes, their pens moving so fast they blurred on the page. Lawyers whispered heatedly, to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief while others nodded thoughtfully. Spectators leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks to get a better look at Laura, who stood calmly in the witness box despite the storm she had unleashed. Judge Richard Grayson banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "Quiet," he barked, his voice cutting through the din like a knife. Gradually, the noise subsided, though the tension in the air remained thick. All eyes returned to Laura, waiting for her to explain further. "Ms. Bennett," Judge Grayson began, his tone stern yet curious, "you've made a very serious claim. Are you suggesting that someone deliberately altered your speech and possibly your identity, for reasons unknown?" Laura took a deep breath, her hands gripping the railing of the witness box tightly. Her knuckles were white, but her voice stayed steady. "Yes," she replied simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Her answer sent another ripple of murmurs through the room. People exchanged glances, unsure whether to believe her or dismiss her as unstable. Some leaned closer, hanging on to her every word, while others shook their heads dismissively. Even Daniel Harper, Laura's lawyer, looked uneasy, though he quickly masked it with a reassuring nod aimed at his client. Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, studying Laura carefully. "Go on," he said after a pause. "Tell us more. Laura?" hesitated, choosing her words carefully. When I woke up in the hospital 3 months ago, everything felt wrong. My reflection in the mirror, it wasn't me. Not the me I remember anyway. And this voice. She gestured vaguely to her throat. It doesn't feel natural, like I'm forcing myself to speak in a way that isn't mine. The confession left the room breathless. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah Mitchell, the prosecution attorney, stood abruptly, her face flushed with frustration. "Your Honor," she protested, "this has nothing to do with the charges against Mr. Carter. Ms. Bennett's claims are irrelevant to the case at hand." Judge Grayson raised a hand, silencing her. "Overruled," he said firmly. Turning back to Laura, he added, "Continue, Ms. Bennett." Encouraged by the judge's support, Laura pressed on. "At first, I thought I was losing my mind. Doctors kept telling me it was all in my head, that I'd recover with time. But then, strange things started happening. I found marks on my skin, symbols carved into my arms and legs. When I asked about them, no one could explain where they came from." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the room. "And then there were the voices." "Voices?" Judge Grayson repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Laura confirmed. "They're faint, like whispers in the back of my mind. At first I thought I was imagining them, but they've grown louder, clearer. They tell me not to trust anyone. They say I'm in danger." The courtroom erupted again, the buzz of conversation growing, louder with each passing second. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail, their cameras flashing wildly. Jurors exchanged bewildered looks, unsure how to process what they were hearing. Even Judge Grayson seemed momentarily stunned, his usually composed demeanor faltering. Amid the chaos, a man near the back of the room slipped quietly toward the exit. He wore a dark suit and kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. No one noticed him leave. Not until it was too late. Just as he reached the door, he dropped something, a small metallic device that clattered to the floor. It emitted a low hum, barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder. Panic spread like wildfire. People leapt to their feet, shouting and pushing toward the exits. Chairs toppled over, papers flew everywhere, and the once orderly courtroom descended into pandemonium. Laura froze, staring at the device with wide eyes. She recognized it immediately. Or rather, the voices in her head did. "That's one of them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They're trying to silence me." Daniel Harper grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the witness box. "We need to get out of here," he shouted over the noise. Together they pushed through the crowd, dodging panicked spectators and overturned furniture. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed around them, shoving microphones in their faces and firing questions rapidly. "What's going on? Who are the voices, Ms. Bennett? Do you think you're being targeted?" Laura ignored them, focusing instead on finding safety. As they turned a corner, a black sedan screeched to a halt beside them. The driver rolled down the window. It was Emily Dawson, a journalist who had been covering the trial. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her face was flushed with excitement. "Get in," she yelled, motioning frantically. "I don't know what's going on, but I'm guessing you'll need backup." Without hesitation, Laura and Daniel climbed into the car. Emily floored the accelerator, speeding away from the courthouse just as security guards spilled out onto the steps, shouting into their radios. Inside the vehicle, the three of them sat in stunned silence, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Finally, Emily broke the quiet. "Okay, spill it," she demanded, glancing at Laura in the rearview mirror. "What the hell is going on?" Laura hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. But given the circumstances, she knew she didn't have a choice. Taking a deep breath, she recounted everything. The mysterious symbols, the voices in her head, the feeling that her entire identity had been rewritten. Emily listened intently, snapping photos of the marks on Laura's arms when prompted. "So let me get this straight," Emily said slowly, her brow furrowed. "You think you're part of some kind of secret experiment? One that involves altering memories and identities?" Laura nodded grimly. That's what the voices keep telling me. And if that device back there is any indication, whoever's behind it doesn't want me talking. Daniel rubbed his temples, looking overwhelmed. This is insane, he muttered. Completely insane. Insane or not, we can't ignore it, Emily countered. If Laura's right, then we're dealing with something far bigger than corporate fraud. This could be national security stuff. As the sedan sped down the highway, Laura stared out the window, her mind racing. She didn't fully understand what was happening to her, but one thing was clear. She couldn't stop now. Whoever had done this to her wasn't going to let her walk away easily. And if she wanted answers, if she wanted her life back, she would have to fight for them. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, Laura felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. With Daniel and Emily by her side, she might actually stand a chance. But deep down, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The people behind her transformation were powerful, resourceful, and dangerous. They wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried, and, as the sedan disappeared into the distance, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The safe house was quiet, too quiet. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace, it was heavy, pressing down on everyone inside like an invisible weight. Laura sat at a wooden table cluttered with papers, laptops, and glowing monitors. The room smelled faintly of coffee and stale air, evidence of long hours spent hunched over their work. Outside, the city buzzed with life, but here, they were isolated, cut off from the world as they pieced together fragments of a puzzle far bigger than any of them had imagined. Laura stared at the screen in front of her, her brow furrowed in concentration. On it was a series of strange symbols, shapes and lines that seemed random at first glance but formed patterns when studied closely. These were the same marks she'd found etched into her skin weeks earlier, though now they appeared everywhere. Hidden in emails, embedded in digital files, even scrawled faintly on documents recovered from the courthouse chaos. Each time she saw them, the voices in her head grew louder, whispering warnings she couldn't ignore. This has to mean something, Laura said aloud, breaking the silence. Her voice sounded tired, strained. She glanced up at Daniel Harper, who stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He looked exhausted too, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. "You're sure these symbols are connected to whoever did this to you?" he asked, gesturing toward the screen. Laura nodded. "I don't know how I know, it's just instinct. Or maybe it's the voices telling me." She paused, frowning slightly. "Either way, they're important." Emily Dawson sat nearby, typing furiously on another laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as lines of code scrolled past on the monitor. "If these symbols are part of some kind of system," she said without looking up, "then there's got to be a key somewhere. Something that ties them all together." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Even if we find the key, what then? We still don't have proof, not the kind that'll hold up in court anyway. And let's not forget, whoever's behind this isn't exactly playing fair." "No kidding," Emily muttered under her breath. She reached for the small metallic device they'd salvaged from the courthouse. It lay on the table between them, humming softly. None of them knew exactly what it was or how it worked, but they could all feel its menace. It was a reminder of how close they'd come to disaster, and how much danger they were still in. Laura leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "We need answers," she said firmly. "Not just for me, but for everyone else who might be caught up in this. If I'm not the only one." Her words trailed off, but the implication hung in the air. None of them wanted to consider the possibility that Laura wasn't alone, that others might have been subjected to the same fate. But deep down, they all knew it was likely. The sheer scale of what they were uncovering suggested that this wasn't a one-time experiment. This was systematic, organized, and terrifyingly efficient. For hours, they worked tirelessly, sifting through files, cross-referencing data, and analyzing every clue they could find. Slowly, pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Hidden within Laura's email account was a file buried so deeply it almost seemed intentional. a breadcrumb trail left by someone who wanted her to follow it. Inside the file were coordinates pointing to a location outside Chicago, along with a single phrase written in bold letters. "Find me." "What does it mean?" Emily asked, staring at the screen. "Is this supposed to lead us somewhere?" "It has to," Laura replied. "Whoever planted this must have known I'd discover it eventually. Maybe it's a message from my old self, the person I used to be before." She hesitated, unable to finish the sentence. Daniel straightened up, his expression grim. "If this is real, then we're walking into something big, bigger than we can handle on our own." "We don't have a choice," Laura insisted. "If we don't go, we'll never know the truth, and if we stay here, they'll find us." Emily nodded reluctantly. "She's right. Sitting ducks aren't going to survive this." With no other options, they made plans to investigate the location. They packed supplies, reviewed maps, and prepared for whatever awaited them. As they worked, the reality of their situation settled over them like a dark cloud. They weren't investigators or spies. They were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Yet somehow, they had to rise to the challenge. The next morning, they set out in Emily's sedan, heading toward the coordinates. The drive was tense, each mile bringing them closer to the unknown. Laura gazed out the window, watching the landscape shift from urban sprawl to rural emptiness. Her mind raced with questions. What would they find at the end of this journey? Would it bring clarity or more chaos? As they approached the outskirts of Chicago, the roads became narrower, flanked by dense trees that blocked out the sunlight. Eventually, they arrived at a secluded compound surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. Security cameras scanned the perimeter, their lenses glinting ominously in the dim light. "This is it," Emily whispered, parking the car a safe distance away. "Now what?" Laura took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We get inside." They moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows as they searched for a way in. After several tense minutes, they spotted a side entrance partially obscured by overgrown bushes. The door was locked, but Emily produced a set of tools from her bag and went to work. Within moments, the lock clicked open, and they slipped inside. The interior of the compound was eerily silent. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Rows of pods lined the space, each containing an unconscious figure hooked up to machines monitoring vital signs. Monitors displayed streams of data mapping neural activity, confirming Laura's worst fears. She was part of a classified program aimed at erasing identities and implanting new ones. "Oh my God," Emily breathed, her voice barely audible. "This is monstrous." Laura stepped closer to one of the pods, her heart pounding. Through the glass, she saw a young man lying motionless, his face pale and expressionless. His arm bore the same symbol she'd found on herself. Tears welled in her eyes as realization hit her. She wasn't alone. There were others. Dozens of them, trapped in this nightmare. Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Armed guards appeared, shouting orders and raising their weapons. Panic surged through the group as they realized they were outnumbered and cornered. But instead of surrendering, Laura stepped forward, addressing the lead officer directly. "You don't have to follow orders blindly," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Whatever they've done to me, they'll do to others, including you." Her words struck a nerve. One guard hesitated, lowering his weapon slightly. Then another followed suit. Chaos erupted as internal divisions fractured the unit, giving Laura, Daniel, and Emily a chance to escape. Clutching critical evidence, they fled into the night, knowing their fight was far from over. Back in the safety of the car, Laura stared, ahead her mind racing. They had uncovered the truth, but exposing it would be another battle entirely. For now, they drove onward, determined to keep fighting for justice, for freedom, and for the countless others still trapped in the shadows. The cold night air bit at their skin as Laura, Daniel, and Emily ran for their lives. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, visible in the frosty darkness like ghostly puffs of smoke. Behind them, shouts echoed through the compound, growing louder with each passing second. Armed guards spilled out of the building, their flashlights cutting through the shadows as they gave chase. "We need to move faster," Daniel yelled over his shoulder, his voice strained with urgency. He glanced back briefly, his eyes widening, as he saw how close the guards were getting. "They're gaining on us." Laura didn't respond. She focused on putting one foot in front of the other, clutching the small USB drive tightly in her hand. It was everything. The proof they needed to expose the horrifying truth about the program. If they lost it, all their efforts would be for nothing. Her heart pounded in her chest, not just from the physical exertion but from the weight of what they carried. This tiny piece of technology held the key to freeing countless people trapped in those pods, and stopping whoever was behind this nightmare. Emily led the way, her sharp instincts guiding them toward a narrow path that wound through the woods surrounding the compound. She had scouted the area earlier, memorizing potential escape routes. "This way," she called out, pointing toward a cluster of trees ahead. "If we can reach the car, we might have a chance." But reaching the car wasn't going to be easy. The guards were relentless, their boots thudding heavily against the ground as they closed the gap. One of them fired a warning shot into the air, the crack of the bullet sending a chill down Laura's spine. They weren't playing around anymore. "Stay low," Daniel ordered, grabbing Laura's arm and pulling her behind a fallen tree trunk. Emily ducked beside them, panting hard. For a moment, they crouched there, listening to the chaos unfold around them. The guards' voices grew closer, barking orders and scanning the area with their flashlights. Laura's mind raced. They couldn't keep running forever, not with so many guards on their tail. They needed a distraction, something to buy them enough time to slip away unnoticed. Then she remembered the device Emily had brought along, a small gadget designed to create electronic interference. It was risky, but it might work. "Emily," Laura whispered urgently, holding up the device. "Can you use this to disable their equipment?" Emily frowned, weighing the idea. "It'll knock out their comms and cameras temporarily, but it won't last long. We'd need to act fast." "Do it," Daniel said firmly. "We don't have a better option." Nodding, Emily activated the device. A soft hum filled the air, followed by a series of sharp clicks as the guards' radios sputtered and died. Their flashlights flickered, plunging the area into near-total darkness. Confusion rippled through the group of pursuers as they scrambled to regroup. "Now!" Daniel hissed, pushing both women forward. They bolted upright, darting deeper into the woods while the guards stumbled blindly in the opposite direction. Branches whipped at their faces and roots threatened to trip them with every step, but they didn't slow down. Survival depended on speed. After several agonizing minutes, they finally reached the edge of the forest. Beyond it lay an empty stretch of road where Emily's sedan waited, hidden beneath a tarp to avoid detection. Relief washed over them as they climbed inside, slamming the doors shut behind them. "Go, go, go," Laura urged, her voice trembling. With adrenaline, Emily didn't hesitate. She started the engine and floored the accelerator, tires squealing as the car sped away from the compound. In the rearview mirror, they could see flashes of light as the guards realized they'd been tricked. Shots rang out, bullets ricocheting harmlessly off the pavement behind them. "That was too close," Daniel muttered, slumping back in his seat. His face was pale, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the chill of the night. "Way too close." Laura nodded silently, staring down at the USB drive in her palm. She felt a mix of emotions, relief, fear, determination, all swirling together in a chaotic storm. They had escaped, yes, but their fight was far from over. Now came the hard part, exposing the truth without getting caught. For the next hour, they drove in silence, putting as much distance between themselves and the facility as possible. When they finally stopped to rest at a secluded roadside diner, exhaustion hit them like a wave. They ordered coffee and sandwiches, barely touching their food as they discussed their next move. "So what's the plan?" Emily asked, breaking the quiet. "We've got the evidence, but how do we make sure it gets out? Whoever's running this program isn't just going to sit back and let us expose them." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We need to go public," he said firmly. Get the information to journalists, activists, anyone who can amplify it. Once it's out there, they won't be able to cover it up. But we have to be smart about it, Laura added. If they find us before we release the data, they'll destroy it and us. Emily nodded thoughtfully. Then we split up. I'll handle distributing the files online while you two stay off the grid. That way, even if they catch one of us, the others can still get the message out. No, Laura said immediately, shaking her head. I'm not splitting up, not again. Her voice softened as memories surfaced, fragments of a life she couldn't fully recall, but which haunted her nonetheless. Whoever did this to me, they already took everything. I'm not letting them take my friends too. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We stick together, he agreed. Whatever happens, we face it as a team. With renewed resolve, they finalized their plan. First, they would secure the data, making copies and storing them in multiple locations to ensure its survival. Then, they would contact trusted allies, journalists, whistleblowers, and activists who could help spread the word. Finally, they would disappear, laying low until the story broke and forced the authorities to act. As dawn approached, they returned to the road, their spirits bolstered by the knowledge that they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. Each mile brought them closer to freedom and closer to justice. But deep down, they knew the battle was only beginning. The people behind the program wouldn't give up easily. They had power, resources, and no qualms about silencing anyone who stood in their way. Still, Laura refused to back down. As she stared out the window at the rising sun, she made a silent promise to herself. No matter what happened, she would see this through. For the sake of everyone trapped in those pods, and for the person she used to be, she would fight until the very end. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Laura, Daniel, and Emily worked tirelessly, racing against time to ensure the truth reached the world before their enemies could silence them. They had taken refuge in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, its crumbling walls providing just enough cover to keep them hidden. Inside, they transformed the space into a makeshift command center, filled with laptops, cables, and stacks of printed documents. The air buzzed with tension as they prepared to release the evidence they had risked everything to uncover. Laura sat at the center of it all, her eyes glued to one of the monitors. On the screen was a map of the facility they had escaped from, overlaid with data streams mapping neural activity and surveillance footage of the pods. Each frame confirmed what she already knew. This wasn't just an experiment. It was a systematic erasure of human identity. Countless lives had been rewritten, erased and replaced without consent, and now, thanks to the USB drive she had retrieved, the world would finally see the truth. We need to upload this to as many places as possible, Emily said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. If we spread it wide enough, they won't be able to take it down. Daniel nodded, pacing back and forth as he spoke into a secure phone. He was coordinating with journalists and activists who had agreed to help amplify their message. The first wave will hit social media in 10 minutes, he reported. After that, major news outlets will pick it up. Once it goes viral, there's no stopping it. Laura felt a surge of hope, but also fear. She knew the moment the information went public, their lives would change forever. There would be no turning back. Whoever was behind the program wouldn't hesitate to retaliate, and they had resources far beyond anything the trio could imagine. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Too much was at stake. Are you ready? Daniel asked, looking at Laura directly. His tone was gentle but firm, acknowledging the weight of what they were about to do. She took a deep breath, nodding slowly. I'm ready, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Let's do this. Emily pressed the final key, initiating the upload process. One by one, the files began appearing online, videos, documents, and images exposing the horrifying reality of the program. Within minutes, hashtags started trending on social media, drawing attention from around the globe. News outlets scrambled to verify the claims, airing live reports and interviews with experts. The story dominated headlines, sparking outrage and calls for accountability. As the world reacted, Laura watched silently, her emotions a tangled mess. Part of her felt relief, knowing the truth was out there. But another part felt grief, for the people still trapped in those pods, for the person she used to be, and for the countless others whose lives had been stolen. She wondered if justice would ever truly be served, or if some wounds ran too deep to heal. Meanwhile, the fallout began almost immediately. Government officials issued statements condemning the program, promising investigations and reforms. Law enforcement agencies raided facilities linked to the operation, seizing equipment and detaining key figures. Protesters took to the streets, demanding answers and holding signs that read, "Who are you?" and "Bring them back." But not everyone welcomed the revelations. Powerful individuals and organizations fought back, attempting to discredit the evidence and cast doubt on its authenticity. Online trolls spread misinformation, sowing confusion among the public. Death threats poured in, targeting Laura, Daniel, and Emily specifically. For every step forward, it seemed like 2 steps backward. Despite the chaos, the trio remained resolute. They continued working, answering questions from reporters, collaborating with investigators, and advocating for the victims. Laura became the face of the movement, speaking out about her own experiences and urging others to come forward. Her courage inspired people worldwide, igniting a global conversation about identity, autonomy, and the ethics of scientific experimentation. 1. Evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Laura stood alone by the warehouse window, gazing out at the city skyline. The lights twinkled faintly in the distance, a reminder of how vast and interconnected the world truly was. Behind her, Daniel and Emily packed up their gear, preparing to move locations once again. Staying in one place for too long was dangerous. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. "You okay?" Daniel asked, joining her at the window. His voice was soft, tinged with concern. "I don't know," Laura admitted, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes I wonder, is this enough? Will exposing the truth really make a difference?" "It has to," Daniel replied firmly. "You've already done more than anyone thought possible. You've given people a chance to fight back, to reclaim what was taken from them." Laura smiled faintly, appreciating his words, even if she didn't fully believe them yet. "What happens next?" she asked quietly. "That's up to us," Emily interjected, walking over to join the conversation. She held up a flash drive, containing backup copies of the evidence. "We keep fighting, we stay vigilant, and we never stop asking questions." Laura nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how daunting the road ahead, she knew they couldn't give up, not when so much was at stake. Together they had uncovered the truth. Together, they would continue to fight for justice. As the trio stepped out into the night, disappearing into the shadows, Laura left behind a cryptic message for anyone who might follow in their footsteps. If they can rewrite us once, they can do it again. Stay vigilant. And somewhere, in the depths of cyberspace, the whispers continued, a haunting reminder that the battle for humanity's soul was far from over.